Welcome to this seminar where we're going to talk about ways in which we can improve our decision making both in our everyday personal lives as well as in our professional lives. We will talk about various aspects of what prevents us from making good decisions as well as ways in which we can improve our decision making.
My objective today is just to share with you some thinking about the way in which we make decisions. We make so many during the day. I don't know, a typical day could be 167 decisions. I'm sure there's some additional scientific research. But one of the things that I found fascinating throughout my career at Ernst& Young, as well as here in academia, is we don't spend enough time thinking about it. So what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through and I'm going to leave the mics open. So if anybody has comments to share, I don't want to make this strictly a lecture. I'd like you to share comments as we go around. Let's start to talk about decision making. So the typical ways we make decisions are pros and cons, lists of criteria, spreadsheets. I'm sure some of you have weighted criteria. You make your decisions from the gut. One of my least favorite is decisions by default. And that's all of a sudden the decision is made for you. You run out of time. Somebody else makes the decision. Never a real good position to be in. Or you allow a prior decision to make new ones. So with that, other decision-making approaches out there, Tom or Richard or Eric, Jennifer, what would you say are some of your ways of making decisions?
I would say this is Richard. For myself, I mean, spreadsheets is kind of one that sticks out to me. Working in sort of a finance slash analytical role, a lot of our decisions are weighted decisions, but I'd say oftentimes we also have to, we call it like the separation of art and science. Sometimes you will often find senior management making decisions from the gut, and we're sort of there to be kind of like an analytical, resource for them.
Yep.
But sometimes, like I said, you sort of see that overlap of art and science.
Richard, you mentioned that, and that was when I got into the whole decision making and teaching it and all of that. As a consultant, I found that was the whole idea of the way in which decisions were made throughout an organization, which would be different at the operating level versus the senior management level. And, as a consultant and preparing all these great analyses and whatnot, and then all of a sudden the decision would go differently than what your analysis said. And it was because it was made within the context of the company values or a governmental consideration. So I certainly understand that no matter how we do and how we prepare our spreadsheets, sometimes they don't necessarily help us make better decisions.
Right.
And when we take a look at the questions in terms of when we make bad decisions, we oftentimes know it right away. And I don't know, I'll put it out to any of you. How about an example of a good or a bad decision? You can stay anonymous if need be. But I'm sure our president has plenty of them. And usually when I have this conversation, it all relates to whoever the president is, irrespective of the party. But again, how do you judge the quality of your decisions? And what are some of the good or bad ones you made? Somebody must have made a bad hire out there.
Well, the recent good decision that we made was to open our business on Sundays. We've been a 6-day-a-week business for a long, long time, and we received so much feedback from our clients that they were interested in bringing pets in, of course, on Sundays. So we used a combination of data from the clients, surveys and that kind of thing, and also financial data to help us make the decision. And it's been a great one in the end, but it's been a real challenge on the staffing side. So there's sort of been an emotional, I think, consequence to some degree there, which we're working through now, successfully so far. But it's definitely been sort of been an interesting experience, and we've been, factoring in a couple of different areas. So.
That is particularly the challenge of all of a sudden you realizing that you're competing at the retail level, Tom, I'm sure, as opposed to
Exactly.
you always thought of yourself as more medicine and focused in that regard. That's a very interesting and good luck to you there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we
I'm
knew it was
sure.
the right thing, and now we're just working through the logistics, of course, with the staff and making this as easy as possible for everybody on the team.
Excellent. Excellent. So, we have the good decisions, the bad decisions in the world of sports and politics. There are decisions every day. I think we're seeing fewer and fewer decisions come out of Washington. It's become known as gridlock. Um, Not much is getting done. But, here's my first set of words of wisdom. We make bad decisions, and sometimes we know we do. And what I hope to share today is an approach that I found particularly helpful um, for those of you who are readers of management books. A lot of what I'm going to talk about revolves around a book called Decisive by the Heath brothers. And I would encourage all of you to take a look at it. It's a great book. It's an easy read. And when I teach decision making in the classroom, I use it. And one of the most important elements is to understand what gets in the way of good decisions. And typically, one of the things is you don't realize you have many choices and many options, or you have options and you want to select the one that serves your emotion, that serves your purpose. Um, and sometimes it gets in the way of you making a good rational decision. And then you make a decision and then you're overconfident that it's going to work out. Or you just look and see that you think you only have one option rather than seeing many, many options available. So these are considered villains of getting in the way of good decision making. I don't know if anybody else would like to share what some of the villains of their good decision making is, but when you start to take a look at the bad guys, fear of a bad decision or the timing differences. Not every decision is truly laid out clearly and will happen at the right time. Yes, men and women happen all the time, or you don't have enough information or too much information. And I'm sure some of you can relate to the situation where you just want to stop collecting information and just be able to make the decision, but it continues to go back and people wanting additional information to give them additional insight. What are some of the other bad guys in making decisions that you care to share? How about you, Richard, Jennifer, Mary? Well, I will offer the human one, which is really, we worry about making a bad decision. And sometimes just the pressure of making a bad decision gets in the way of us actually making a good decision. So it's you kind of operate and make your decision making out of fear rather than saying, okay, I'm going to make the decision. I'm going to be comfortable with it and go forward. And of course, the most pressure you'll get on a bad decision is picking a restaurant for your friends. That happens all the time. That's when you talk about fear of making a bad decision, because if you pick the wrong place, nobody's going to be happy. So decisions as big and as small as they all have these same bad guys kicking in. And I think one of the biggest challenges that you have in making your decisions is knowing when you have enough information, you've looked at enough options, you make the decision and go. And the question is, how much information is enough? So the RAP process is from the Heath brothers. And I'm going to walk through this pretty briefly. Again, we're trying to keep this to a nice half an hour discussion and conversation. But the Heath brothers use something called the RAP process. And just so if any of you want to get information on the Heath brothers, go out there. They have their own website. You can sign up. You can get cheat sheets. You can get some of the information I share with you. There's all sorts of examples and case studies that are nice to read. The Heath brothers are very welcoming. Yes, they like to sell books, but they also like to help everybody with their decision making. So with the RAP process, it is really widen your options, look at many, many opportunities, check them, see if they're going to work. Take a look at your decision from a distance and see what's going to happen. And remember that at some point you will be wrong. So prepare to be wrong. So I'm going to just talk through briefly a couple of those. And widening the options is probably the most important element when you start to take a look at your decisions. And oftentimes we tend to think of decisions as yes and no, rather than saying, well, it's yes and no, and maybe there's another possibility, another option. And you'll recall cases where you say, well, would like this person to work in this position. Do they fit into the job or not? Rather than looking at the job itself and maybe changing and expanding the opportunities, or looking at other possibilities for an individual to work on your team. We tend to say it's a yes or no, it's binary. So the most important element to get going is to figure out what the options are. Sometimes we have too many options, and I would challenge you to take a look at all of those options and consider getting rid of a couple of options. You know, you may have an option to continue the project, stop the project, modify the scope of work of the project, or just continue on as is with additional resources. What I would encourage you to do is to take a look at a bunch of those options and figure out which ones make sense, test them out, see if you can get rid of the options, try to narrow it down and really kind of change the world and mix up your options into 2 or 3 juxtaposed against each other to come to a decision. You know, whether or not you're going to continue on with the project, whether or not you're going to launch a product, do you need a complementary product along the way? So try to get as many options as you can on the table, get rid of the obvious ones. And by getting the options on the table, it'll give you a much better perspective on what really is essential, what are the criteria, what are the necessary elements for your decision making. And one of the things when you start to take a look at options is looking at options as complementary or additive, being able to add on an option rather than just saying it's a yes or no, and maybe it's a yes or no, and you could continue on and add the possibilities. And one of the ways to do that is to find somebody who's solved your problem before. And if there's one thing that I think we've all learned in business is try to find somebody who solved your problem, or somebody that you can talk to about the decision you're making, who is only interested in you making the right decision. Somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in your decision. You know, we always look for, this is kind of in the parlance of TV, you know, call a friend, ask them what they think, present them with your case. They'll come up and they'll challenge you, and they'll ask you to share your point of view, your decision. Why do you want to have these criteria be so important? So somebody who just has a vested interest in your decision making, bring them in and ask them to give you an opinion. You know, should we continue the product in this way, or should we shift and move forward in looking at providing service in addition to the product that we have? So these options are out there, and oftentimes we get really narrowly focused on a yes or no. Do we move forward with a project or not, rather than having somebody help us shape the direction of a project, shape the structure of a project. Again, find out what your options are out there And then go out there and reality test. One of the things when we make decisions really relates to fighting confirmation bias. Has anybody ever gone into a decision with a confirmation bias? And that is, you really want to make this decision. You know, I would really want to have this course run because I'm going to teach it. And I know it's going to be good. Rather than, you know, for me asking Nicole, hey, Nicole, do you think people are going to like it? Do you think people are going to jump in and take the course? I might have a bias just to run it because I'm comfortable it's going to happen. Oftentimes in sports, when we put together a team, there is a confirmation bias. These people are going to work. They are going to be helpful. We know it's going to be good. Or if we find that we decide to collect information that only supports our point of view. And I think you'll find that often in middle management. I don't know if anybody would care to share that's the case. I have plenty of client situations that I ran into that when we decided to shut down a plant, we didn't decide, we recommended. We had one of the CFOs of that organization continued to insist that that particular plant would be profitable, would run, provided us with information that was a little bit more optimistic than need be, because again, he was just collecting information to show us that that particular plant was going to become profitable. Anybody have when you talk about confirmation bias and collecting information that only supports your argument, does anybody run into that at all?
I think on a smaller scale, it's easy to fall into that sometimes with hiring, depending on the positions and the need to fill the position.
Yep, you know that person's going to be there. You know, you don't do that second reference check. I got it. That's an excellent.
Exactly.
I'd say that also happens sort of in my organization, like as our company might be looking for new revenue streams, you know, new business opportunities that maybe someone in senior management had, you know, idea that this might work, and they're sort of looking for, you as the analyst or you know, sort of the financial data gatherer might have information that says that, you know, maybe it's not as great of an idea as what we thought, you know, and oftentimes you'll see, I shouldn't say often, but it does happen that you'll see middle management sometimes try to, you know, force you to show data in a more rosy picture than what it might really be. I'd say we run into that situation from time to time in my organization.
Yep. You know, and I can recall, you know, based upon what the two of you shared, that I can remember a situation where, you know, as a consultant, I was told that this was the answer, and now go and find the data to support it.
Right.
It's like, really? And, you know, that's a fine line, particularly when you're an outsider. Or when your boss says, okay, this is the way it has to be. And in your heart of hearts, you know it isn't. The data doesn't show it, but your boss has presented you with enough of his or her points of view that it's one of those, you know, they've got the confirmation bias. They believe it's going to work, and the data is not showing it. And that gets at the other thing that we typically don't do, which is when you, for example, ask a friend, or you want to have a discussion, you want to ask the questions. We don't often seek to test or trial balloon our ideas with others because we don't want the disagreement. We don't want to be uncomfortable and have to defend what we think is good. Yeah, I think that we need to take the business in this direction. We want just the information that justifies it, that says, yes, you need to go into this line of business, rather than going to places and asking people their opinion and getting some constructive disagreement. That's a hard thing from a human point of view, that we don't do very often, but it's asking those tough questions, those, disconfirming or uncomfortable questions about our choices and our proposals. And that's particularly important that we work with our younger staff along the way to ask those kinds of discomforting and disconfirming questions. And when we talk about reality testing our options, and this is something I'm sure everybody does a lot, is try it out. The whole idea of making a deliberate mistake. Let's see if it'll work in this way. We're going to try it in 3 ways. One of them will probably not work. Or if we have a direction that we want to go, take a look at it and say, well, what if we didn't go in that direction? What if we didn't launch that product? What if we invested in another product line? One of the interesting ways that I like to look at a decision is to get as far away from the decision as you can. Take a look at what it would look like a couple years out, what it would look like from somebody else's point of view, a customer point of view, a supplier point of view. Begin to take a look at the broader picture and help you really, test out, will it work within the markets? Will it work within this customer group? Or zoom in and take a look at whether we can actually do the business. Can we, add this product line? Do we have the manufacturing capacity and capability? And then, many opportunities present in terms of pilot testing and try it out. I'm sure in your businesses, everybody's always looking for growth. Well, how do we know it's going to work? Well, 9 times out of 10, most companies will say, well, let's test it in this region. Let's roll out the new McDonald's Super Big Mac in a region and see how it goes. And again, it's really nothing more than reality testing what your options are. You haven't made a big commitment yet, but you're trying to see if the consumer really likes the McRib sandwich or whatever it may be. So again, as you take a look at it, look at it really closely, back out, and then pilot test things along the way. And here's one of my favorite approaches is getting away from your decision. If you're agonizing, there are more decisions and more information, and that's when you go around and collect and work with other parts of your organization. One I always like to share with people is the 10-10-10 rule, which is when you're agonizing over the decision, and this gets at the importance of the decision. This gets at the way in which you're going to make a decision. So the 10-10-10 rule is one of my favorite, which says, okay, what's going to happen in 10 minutes after you make the decision? What's going to happen in 10 days? What's going to happen in 10 months? Take a look at the decision and in that context. So if we decide to launch this product in the next 10 minutes, next 10 hours, what's going to happen? What about in the next 10 days? And what about in the next 10 months? Or you could add it in years. But try to get some distance in an order of magnitude. And then you can get a sense of, well, let's take picking a restaurant. The next 10 minutes is going to be pretty important, what you pick. 10 days from now, nobody's going to remember. Or maybe somebody will remember if it's a disaster so bad. And 10 months from now, all your friends are just going to not worry about the decision. It was made along the way. When you start to take a look at a hiring situation, let's say in the next 10 days, was the hire good or not? In the next 10 months, did it work or not, or the next 10 years? So use different time frames to look at the decision, and this can tell you the magnitude and the consequence of the actual decision itself. And then look back and say, okay, given that I'm 10 months out, is that the right thing to do? I'm 10 days out, is that the right thing to do? So try the 10-10-10 rule, that helps. And then one other one is, I always like it. What would your successor consider or do? For example, Tom, if somebody had your job, what do you think they would do? What points of view would they bring forward? Get away from who you are in making the decision and say, what would the controller in the other organization do? And that's when you could actually pick up the phone and get a colleague to share with you that information. And then again, you really get at getting the distance, what's important to making your decisions. You see a company like J&J, and oftentimes, and for those of you who have been exposed to them, they have a credo. And their credo really represents their core priorities. And this is how J&J operates, how they make their decisions. That is the fundamental bellwether of whether the decision is good. Also try to make decisions with a more positive point of view, pushing it out and trying to get away from the status quo, recognize the risk, and then move forward in managing the risk. And then one of the challenges we have, and I will say in academia, and I won't necessarily say my institution here, is we tend to forget about the important elements, and we tend to dwell on the lesser priorities, and we want more information about specific things that really aren't a consequence to a good class or really a consequence to a good program. We get involved and wrapped up in too many petty or smaller things. So get rid of those as you make the decision, and make sure that, again, your data cannot be challenged. Your data cannot be attacked. Make sure your data is strong in going forward. And then prepare to be wrong. It happens. But when you think about it, when you decide to go in a specific business, Tom, maybe this relates to the one you had. What if it was a disaster and nobody showed up at the hospital with their pets on a Sunday? What would that feel like? So then you take a look at the consequences of that. Or you take a look at it in a pre-parade, everything's great. What if we're wildly successful? And it sounds like you guys are headed probably more in that direction. So take a look at it. If you're gonna, again, this helps get out the risk elements. It gets out the elements of challenges to your decision. What if you're wildly successful? What would it look like? What would it feel like? And that'll help you, again, look at good scenarios and bad scenarios and which one will play right to you. And then finally, it's going to happen. You're going to be wrong. Engineers, when they do a design, they put a factor of 2 or 3 or 10 or 15 on the bridge so it doesn't collapse. Sometimes people, when they experiment, and I'll use Tom's example again, if you find you only get 5 patients on 3 Sundays in a row, maybe it's not a good thing to do. But if you get 15, then maybe it's, you're proving out your possibility. So you try it, you pilot test it, see what the opportunity is. And if the business doesn't go the right way, if you don't get the market share you want, if you can't sell at the price you want, set the tripwire and let it go. Make sure that you're in a position to stop whatever business direction you have by setting a tripwire that says, if we don't get the customers, we don't make the money, we just move on. And I guess it really gets at how many decisions do we actually make, but we fear that we're going to be wrong when we make the decision. And I guess my words of wisdom from over my many years is, you really have to lose the fear of being wrong. You just have to be comfortable and confident in making the right decisions with, some of the things we've talked to this point. So I'll share with you, this is a great picture that Lane Change did of the Heath Brothers approach to decision-making, the RAP approach. Make sure that you're in a position to reality test. Make sure you're in a position to look at many options. Don't narrow frame the way in which you look at the business. Get away from your decisions. Take a look at them, minutes, years, months, the 10-10-10. This is a nice little chart to hang around. I will certainly share this with you along the way. But again, in the end, I like the notion, relax about the decisions you're going to make, because you're going to make good ones and you're going to make bad ones. But here are some of my rules. I like to look at a decision beyond just yes and no. Yeah, there will be binary decisions in our life, but really there's always other possibilities. We want to seek out the information and opinions that make us uncomfortable. And that's oftentimes why people bring in a consultant. They have an idea what they want to do, but they're not sure, so they're going to hire outsiders whose only interest is the betterment of the business. Go out there and ask those tough questions. Go out there and find people who won't agree with you, who will challenge you and get you to, defend your point of view, defend the decision you're going to make. Get as much real data as you can. Don't rely on the data of others, but get as much data and information firsthand. That was one thing I found as a consultant working with many companies over the years. So much of what goes on in the field tends to get buried in myths and folklore. Oftentimes our teams would go out and see it. Is it there? Is it real? Or do we tend to get information that's been massaged along the way and you really don't get the view of the world? Bill George from Medtronic, he was the CEO, was seeing that their stents for the hearts that they were putting in hearts were not performing well. The business wasn't good. He went out there to the operating room and found out why. Because they weren't performing well and the surgeons didn't like them. And rather than hearing all the great quality reports he had been hearing for a couple of years, he went out and saw it firsthand. And that these stents that were being put in people's hearts weren't at the level that they should have been. Attain some distance, as I said. Don't compound a bad decision with another bad decision. And that one often happens. We make a bad decision, then we make one on top of it, and then you got to unravel and reconstruct where you want to go. And I always like to ask a friend or a colleague, what do you think? What's your opinion? Other rules to remember. I think we've gone over all of these. What would happen if we were wildly successful? What weren't? And then the bottom line is really decide within your core priorities, values, or strategies. That is why people have visions. That's why they have strategic plans. That's why Johnson & Johnson has its credo, because it gives a bellwether within the organization. Will this help us serve our population better? Will this help us increase our market presence? Will it help us improve the health of our populations that we serve? And then when all else fails, go to the 8 ball, because the 8 ball will always make the right decision for you. So one final thought I'll share with you, and if anybody wants to share a couple of their situations, in the end, bad decisions always make good stories. It's unfortunate, but they do.